competitor for global power, Europe may have a slightly nuanced position on that. It may see opportunities as well as risks. And I think my home country of Australia is a good example of that as well. While for the last few years it's been acting very much as a US proxy, if you like, very much afraid of the rise of China, but equally Australia has benefited probably more than any other country in the world from the rise of China because of the wealth that has been amassed in Australia from exporting to China, which continues to grow, even though there are tensions. So it's complicated. It's complicated, but I think all of those countries that you mentioned do have a role to play, and they have the best role they can play is if they really figure out how to make an original contribution and to addressing the problems of the future rather than looking backwards.
You are all right that COVID was initiated in China, and the other countries, the globe was rethinking to shift the segment of their value chain or supply chain from China. They were looking for alternative to China. So many things happened during COVID period, but later on, while the global community experienced the same, then obviously, do you think this COVID has just started another geological or geopolitical competition to shift the global supply chain permanently?
Well, COVID came at a critical time. It came to the world at the very time of this major power contest between the US and China becoming quite a confrontational one. So there had been tension and there had been competition, of course, which is natural, and there had been some trade tensions and others, but nothing like what began when the US declared China to be its strategic competitor in its 2017 strategy, and at the same time as China also becoming much more muscular and much more aggressive, if you like, in its push for its own power in the region and in the world. And so you had both China and the US increasingly in a confrontational mode with each other at the very moment that a global pandemic arrived. It arrived by chance in China, but it could have arrived by chance in the US. But the fact that it actually had such a huge impact on the world, I think it has affected us in many more ways than we realise, emotional as much as economic or health. And so it's amplified the tensions and fears and risks of that geopolitical competition that is so fundamental to the world, the state of the world today. But also, as you say, it has associated with that, it has led to this whole discussion about supply chains, because some of this discussion is a geopolitical discussion. Some of it is a discussion in the West saying, well, maybe we'll take advantage of this opportunity to reduce our so-called dependence on China. Let's diversify. And actually, diversification is a very good thing for any country, for China as well. For all economies, it's not a good idea to have all of your eggs in the one basket. It's a good idea to have a diversity of partners. And so there's no doubt the combination of COVID, the COVID impact, and the geopolitical competition, I think, is leading to many businesses and governments looking at greater diversification and the opportunity to therefore shift supply chains and sometimes to shorten them as well. I mean, the period of enthusiastic globalization of the last 3 decades created a lot of very long supply chains. So, there are many products that travel all across the world several times before they reach the consumer. And this has developed because of the efficiencies of certain different points in the value chain to add value. But really, I think for good geopolitical and environmental reasons, as well as economic reasons, we may look actually in the future at shortening some supply chains. We may not need everything to be crisscrossing the globe quite as much as it does. The future in a more sustainable economy, in fact, might see us developing shorter supply chains in some critical areas like food supply, for example, but also certainly in national security areas. I mean, I think one of the big exposures that the US realized that it had left itself when it got itself into this strategic competition with China was that the US discovered that its whole national security structure. I think also that the US discovered that it had left itself a little exposed and that its national security capabilities were quite dependent on Chinese technology. And so I think that worried the US a few years ago when that became apparent, and probably did indicate that the US had left itself vulnerable in some areas, and that when it comes to any country's national security, you want to be sure that you are not vulnerable to other states having the capacity to hack into your technology or into your critical infrastructure, because in a time of crisis, in a time of conflict, to have given that opportunity to a potential competitor would be a mistake. And so I think any country, not just the US, but any country will want to look very carefully at national security vulnerabilities in a more globalized world, because the reality is that technologies are increasingly global. And while this is a good thing and brings huge benefits, it also potentially expands the points of risk. And so it does mean we need to take a balanced approach to the spread of technologies, but also the protection of national security, whether you are China, whether you are the US, or whether you are any other country. These are matters that we're going to have to think more about in the future as we inevitably, I think, become even more connected than in the past.
Perfect. You have described, you have come up with so many dimensions of global cooperation. You have also mentioned that the newer technology is coming up. You have mentioned about geopolitical cooperation or rivalry. You have mentioned about the fruitfulness of globalization, because it makes us more efficient, more quicker. And as a result, newer innovation were there. New technology came up, new product and new features in the existing product came up. So actually, world at the same time experience lots of innovation during last century. At the same time, world experienced several wars in last century, including the First World War, Second World War. After some peaceful reason, the US war against terrorism. Just this was the slogan, the tagline, war against terrorism. But its invention in the Middle East, especially in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and many regions. Actually, do you think this sort of invention make US unfaithfulness or trust, it loses the trustworthiness of US among its international ally or friends? And it is also another cause of today's the non-cooperation from many parts of the world with the US. During the Ukraine war, we observed that the fuel, while the US tried to collect fuel from Saudi Arabia or from Dubai and other countries, they have not cooperated with US. Is it the result of that war against terrorists or any particular religious or any particular race, any particular specific regional war? And it leads towards more vulnerable position of current US economy and the global ally. How would you like to evaluate this?
I think the United States is a complicated nation, like any other, but in a sense not like any other. I mean, it is quite unique in one way, and that is that really it was the major power in the world and has been the major power in the world at a time when it has been able to really spread its stories, its narratives very, very powerfully, arguably even more powerfully than previous world powers, because of the information revolution, the ability to hear American stories, to watch American films, or just to absorb the language and the ideas of America is available in almost every corner of the world. Certainly the American products and American brands, from Coca-Cola to blue jeans, these things evoke ideas and ideals. And America is very much an ideological power as much as a place and as a practical entity, but it also is an idea. And Americans themselves, of course, are very much in love with this idea, and much of the world actually also admires the American idea. Of course, we know that it doesn't always live up to the power of the American ideal, and this is something that some of us are critical about more than others. But I'm an optimist. I think that the ideas that America stands for are positive. They have positive intentions.